Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
In this emotionally charged political climate, it is so easy to get distracted from the discussing, debating, affecting things that do matter, those places that we do have commonality and have a good chance to move policy and business in the right direction that is broadly beneficial for all of us. Welcome back, and thanks so much for supporting and watching the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and as we try to do each week on this program, we hope to foster a reasonable dialogue about our current situation. And later on, again, joining our group, South Carolina Ports Authority Chief Jim Newsome.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded October 11th, 2013. On this week's program, Dr. Adolphus Belk, Jr. of Winthrop University, Rand Coble of the North Carolina Center for Public Policy Research, and special guest Jim Newsome, President and CEO of the South Carolina Ports Authority. Now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program, and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Good to see you both, and welcome back. For better, for worse. I want to read a quote, and I want to throw out some statistics you may know. There was a recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll that said that 60% of Americans would replace Congress, just wholesale replace Congress. 75% of Americans, plus or minus, think that we are headed in the wrong direction. And someone used this term to describe what is going on now, and I think it was a pundit on one of the Sunday news shows, and that is that we are in a political depression. You know, Rand, let me start with you on this. It seems like the quote around Thomas Jefferson referring to the office of president, office of Congress are important, but the office of citizen is just as important. Have we dropped the ball in that office?
Well, I think it goes in cycles, Chris. When you said that, I was thinking, I just read a book about Lewis and Clark, and it has a section in it where it describes how partisan things were during Jefferson's time with John Quincy Adams versus Jefferson. I think when the state and the nation are so evenly divided, where each party has a chance of, in effect, becoming the majority, that's when the partisanship steps up and the role of citizen recedes. But it is, a treasured role, both for the people who hold elective office and for people like you and me.
Yeah, do we have the government that we deserve, Adolphus?
I look at it and think on the Jefferson point, when he was running, there were people that said, well, don't vote for him. He's the half-breed son of an Indian squaw and a mulatto. So we've had nasty politics for a while. But to the point about citizens, we got the government that they elected. That the people who are largely behind the stalemate over the budget and the debt ceiling debate, they were sent to Washington by voters that did not support the president. The president lost in some of their districts by 20, 30 points. The people who are pushing the shutdown are very popular in their districts and are likely to be reelected. So in some ways, what you reap is what you sow. This is the government that we sent to Washington, and they're doing some of the things that they promised they would do.
And don't you hear, and don't we talk about a lot of the situation where, we need to replace, 60% of Congress needs to replace, not my congressman, but 60% of those other congressmen. Doesn't that bubble up here?
Well, I actually heard the pollster who did that poll explain it last night, and he said this was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of result. where they said not only fire all the Congress, that was the phrase, but even my congressman. That's one thing that's different. And then they were assigning blame, both among the parties and between House and Senate. So there is something deep anger about this, and the average person tends to. I've stopped at a gas station yesterday, and the guy said, we sent them up there. Why can't they just do their job, pass a budget, deal with the debt ceiling, so on.
So when do we hit the tipping point here? When does something actually draconian happen?
October 17th. If we reach the debt limit, then there are going to be severe consequences for the American economy and the nation state. When you think about what happened during the last go-round when we had this debt ceiling debate, Moody's downgraded our credit rating from AAA to AA and admonished the United States Congress for playing politics with something that shouldn't be about politics. The debt ceiling was raised 17 times during the Reagan administration without very much of a fight. And the idea is that that wasn't about future spending. If you want to have a debate about future spending and taxing policy, that's one thing. This is about spending that we had already committed ourselves to and servicing existing debt. Part of the reason why the United States is one of the greatest risks in the world is that the United States federal government pays its debts. All of that's in jeopardy, and our recovery was already pretty weak coming out of the Great Recession. And now it's weak not because our economic engine is not revved up and ready to go, it's our politics that's holding things back.
And by the way, it's a small statistic maybe not a lot of people know. In 2011, Adolphus, when we did when S&P did drop AAA to AA plus, real money cost to U.S. government, to us as taxpayers, was $1.3 billion additional dollars because of a downgrade in bonds, and more to come on that. Let's go to specifics. In North Carolina, U.S. Senator Kay Hagan looks vulnerable in that seat. It could go either way. Let me ask you this. Tom Tillis, Speaker of the House of North Carolina, has announced that he is running for that seat. Not so much whether Kay's going to lose it or get it, or Tom's going to lose it or get it, but what does it do to the General Assembly for the Speaker of the House to be distracted to some degree?
Well, it does change the power equation. For example, when Governor McCrory came into office, the two people who are the other two power centers, Tillis in the House and Senator Phil Berger in the Senate, had already been in office 2 years. They had a well-established plan of what they wanted to do. All of a sudden, you take one of those three out of the equation, you start a run for Speaker, already 6 people that I've heard possibly running for it. You make Berger more powerful, you probably also strengthen the governor's hand. Does Tillis serve his full term? Who knows? Now, I wouldn't assume, though, Chris, that Tillis is the easy nominee because you've got 2 other candidates who have a strong base. You've got Mark Harris, the pastor of First Baptist in Charlotte, president of the Baptist State Convention. Social conservatives are a big part of the Republican primary. You've got Greg Brannon, a Cary obstetrician who has got strong Tea Party connections. If you add social conservatives and Tea Party, that's half of the Republican primary voters right there. And so this is going to be a pretty tough primary, and fundraising ability is really going to matter, and not spending too much so that you have some left for the general election is also going to be important for the Republican nominee.
Adolphus, South Carolina tends to be moderate and even Republican. Vince Sheehan's going to clearly running against Nikki Haley, Governor Haley. In 2014, how does that play out?
Well, we get Shaheen Haley Part 2, and if we go back a couple of years ago, Haley really came out of nowhere to emerge as the nominee, and she had some star power behind her. She picked up an endorsement from Mitt Romney, but the endorsement that really powered her was Sarah Palin, and that allowed her to raise a lot of money. If you look at the money race right now, it was recently reported that she raised almost $1 million, whereas Shaheen raised about $500,000. Overall, the governor's sitting on a war chest of about $3 million to Shaheen's $1 million. If he can't close that gap, it makes it harder to get his message out there. Moreover, he might suffer if Haley's on the offensive and he's having to respond to her rather than being able to dictate things on his terms.
So dollar for dollar, if he matches Governor Haley, does he have a probability of winning that office?
He has a greater chance because then you're fighting on even ground. The challenge for Shaheen is to point to those things in the governor's record that have been less than stellar. When you're an incumbent, you have an advantage. You have name recognition, you have a better fundraising apparatus, you have some accomplishments on which you can run. The challenge for Shaheen this time around is to say, well, yes, we do have a record, and here's why parts of that record are troublesome, and here's what I can offer you as a new governor.
Yeah, more to come, and we get to watch that rematch coming up probably sooner than 12 months. We have about a minute left before we bring our guest on, Rand. You know, when we do it on this program, the 30 minutes, we have to shoehorn all the critical things in that impact everyone, and invariably what falls between the cracks are the things that matter most to many people, and that is things like mental health and also things like fraud on the elderly. Tell us a little bit about the movement that North Carolina made around fraud on the elderly.
Well, the Center for Public Policy Research had done some research on how critical a problem this is and how it's going to get sort of more prominent with all the baby boomers starting to turn 65 in 2011. Mm-hmm. This is things like people telling you want a sweepstakes and just give us your bank account numbers. Home Health Aid in Charlotte who stole people's accounts and checks while she was working in the home. Another guy with a home repair scam. Your roof is leaking, you got termites in your attic. This past session, I'm pleased to say that two Republican legislators, Senator Stan Bingham and Representative Hugh Blackwell, worked with us in a task force to get legislation passed to do three things. One, prevent fraud by working with the banks to sort of spot it at the outset. Second, to help local agencies report it so that you have an accurate picture of it. And third, to work with district attorneys and the Attorney General of North Carolina to prosecute fraud. That bill passed 46-0 and 111-1. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that'll begin to get a handle on a problem. It's a problem South Carolina, North Carolina nationwide, but unless we get a handle on it quick, it's going to get worse as the baby boomers turn 65.
Well, a nice win, and congratulations. Next week on our program, you know, this is where the rubber meets the road, and you talk about those that run cities and urban areas. They are the chief operating officers of our communities, and they are the city managers. On this program, we have 4 city managers from throughout North and South Carolina. From the city of Charlotte, the new city manager, Ron Carley, will be here. Tom Leith, the longtime city manager from Myrtle Beach, who left and came back because he loved the job so much, and lucky for the Grand Strand. Greensboro's Denise Turner Roth will be here. And then finally from Columbia, who has been in that chair for a long time, Teresa Wilson will join us as well. In the 3 short years since becoming South Carolina Ports Authority president, our guest and his team have engineered a turnaround of ports' fortunes, their brand, and the morale, both inside and among the ports authorities. Given a very sticky political and fiscal environment, how has he done this? Well, here to answer that question, South Carolina Ports Authority President and Chief Executive Officer Jim Newsome. Jim, welcome back.
Thanks, Chris.
Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
You started in 2009. You've got a governor that's arguably not in favor of whatever the port stood for, and this was Mark Sanford we're talking about. Now you have a different governor. But Jim, how did you take an environment both that was politically charged and also economically disarray? How did you do that and turn the ports?
Well, we had to create a shared vision for the port, and that vision was really centering on the fact that a state with a great port could grow above the national economy, you know, because of the era of global sourcing and manufacturing that we're in. And we felt that with being in the fastest growing region in the country, being involved in exporting again as a country, and having the deepest water harbor gave us a chance to prosper as a port. So I think we shared that vision. Our board was driving that, and our legislator and our governor are all on board. And I think the state sees the port today as its major strategic asset, which is what we needed to achieve. We also had to reinvigorate our brand, as you said, and get volume growth back in the picture, because a big fixed cost like a port has to grow to be successful.
You know, you said that you have one of the deepest ports along the coast, but clearly it's not deep enough when Panama Canal opens that second channel. Where are you on that project? How are you going to fund it long term, and especially with Vice President Joe Biden showing up a couple weeks ago?
Well, we're in good shape on our project. We're halfway through our study. We have the deepest harbor in the southeast today. We can handle fully loaded ships with tidal restriction. Our project aims to remove that tidal restriction. We think our study will be done in 2015. We think we can have our harbor finished construction-wise by 2018, and our state legislature took the unprecedented step of funding the entire project. So the money for our project is in a bank account in Columbia today, because we're not really sure what the federal government is going to spend on deepening harbors today.
Right.
Describe for us your chief challenge and what you think the best opportunity going forward are.
Well, our challenge is to continue to grow our volume. We had lost volume significantly in the last decade, so we need to grow, above market for multiple years, and in doing so, then we can invest in assets. So a port's a long cycle asset business, and we've got to sustain a big investment burden to be successful, and to do that, we have to grow our volume.
Well, according to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, the United States has something like a $39.1 billion trade deficit. And I think a lot of the conversation about trade is getting things in, because we do bring in a lot of things from places like China. How will something like this port project help the United States to promote international trade and get things out?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. We are very focused on what we import, but the good news story is that we're exporting prolifically today as a country. In fact, we may be export dominant container-wise by the end of this decade. So you see a lot of manufacturing investment today that is heavily oriented to export business, and that's why we need to deepen our harbors, because we export heavier cargo than we import. So the picture of us only being an importing nation is not really correct today. We're a prolific exporter, and that's good news, I think, for our country.
The Panama Canal has pushed back this whole idea that they're going to open for business, at least the second, and broaden how many more ships and the size of the ships going through the canal, which I bring the question is this, Jim. If you can handle what they call post-Panamax ships, which are the larger ships, without title restrictions, as you said, will that change the calculus between what you do and the total revenue that you do versus something like in LA or a West Coast port?
Well, international logistics is a cost game. And we've seen a shift in cargo, to and from Asia to the East Coast that used to move via the West Coast. And we think there's still room for that to happen, because it's cheaper to use ships all water to the southeast. And our view is that ships are going to get bigger. We're going to see 13,000 TEU ships on the East Coast by the time the Bayonne Bridge is raised in New Jersey.
And TEU are those
20-foot
containers?
equivalent,
Yeah.
right. And so that's going to take a harbor that can handle ships at 48 feet of draft 24 hours a day. So that's what we're trying to do with our deepening, and we think that gives us a chance to grow above market for multiple years.
Right.
Who are your principal competitors along either the East Coast in terms of other ports, and what advantages do you have over other states or other ports?
Well, I think the Southeast as a port region competes with the West Coast, so we try to attract more cargo by a cheaper way of moving it to the Southeast ports. And then we compete within the Southeast, principally with Savannah, not so much with Norfolk or Wilmington today, because freight typically moves to the cheapest inland ports. Our main advantage is the deep water harbor that we have will always be the deepest harbor. We'll have a 5-foot draft advantage pretty much perpetually. The fact that we can get a ship in and out within 15 hours so lines can maintain a reliable schedule, and the fact that none of these ports are in huge cities like Shanghai and Long Beach. So we are regional ports. We serve the entire region of the Southeast, which happens to be the fastest growing population-wise and happens to be one of the few places in the country where we manufacture in significant quantities. So it's a good situation, I think.
How will this project connect to other things? Because you're talking about getting things into the harbor and getting out, but is there a connection between this project and the development of other sort of economic infrastructure, the roads and things of that sort?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I've learned clearly is that, in addition to investing in ports, the rest of the logistics infrastructure has to keep pace. So in South Carolina, that obviously means roads like I-26 and I-85. We've taken an innovative step of building an inland port in Greer, South Carolina, to make use of short-haul rail. And so we need to continue to develop port-related infrastructure and highway infrastructure and rail infrastructure to support our growth.
And I want to follow up on that, continue to grow the infrastructure piece. But before I do that, I want to ask you about the Greer Inland Port. Was the site selection on that mainly because BMW was the low-hanging fruit, and that seemed like the obvious partner to have in that area? And has that worked out?
Well, we owned some land in Greer. Actually, the land on which the BMW plant sits today we own, and we own this 65 acres of land near the BMW plant, which we'd not done anything with for about 30 years. The Norfolk Southern wanted to attract the BMW business on the intermodal rail, and we wanted to build an inland port somewhere in our state. So the ideas came together very quickly. I mean, from January 2012, when we first discussed it, we'll have an inland port in operation in a couple of weeks in Greer, South Carolina.
Is the early utilization of that port is where you want it to be?
Yeah, I mean, we started with a base cargo. That was important because we had the BMW traffic. I believe in 5 years' time, this inland port can handle 100,000 containers, basically, which would be significant. And it's an improvement in the entire logistics infrastructure within our state. And it's also the creation of another distribution hub, a significant distribution hub in the fastest growing part of the Southeast, which is Greenville-Spartanburg.
Yeah, right.
If I went to the port today, what would I see going out and coming in? And what's the biggest piece for you?
Well, for us, 80% of our volume is in containerized traffic. The other 20% is in what I call sophisticated roll-on, roll-off and break bulk cargo, BMW SUVs, GE and Siemens turbines, nuclear power plant parts for Westinghouse. Those are the two segments in which we exist. We want to be in both segments. We're pretty balanced import and export wise today in the container field. That's an advantage for us because lines want export cargo. Most ports have import cargo. The trick is to have export cargo, and we have it. And again, that's where the water theme comes into play, because if we have the deepest harbor in the Southeast, people need to sail foreign from our port to fill their ships.
I think that a lot of this conversation will strike South Carolina listeners as being a great thing to hear about all of this economic activity. What would it mean, though, for those persons that have been out of work and seeking work, that are looking to secure themselves in what's been a pretty tough economic situation?
Well, we say that 1 out of every 10 jobs in South Carolina is indirectly created by the port. So again, a state with a great port is going to attract business, manufacturing, distribution. And I think in today's world, those are very good jobs. I mean, they're jobs with good wages that have, pension benefits, health care benefits. So I think it's an encouraging sign for people to have a prosperous port if they have the right background to work in those industries. And that's one of the challenges today.
Jim, both states, North Carolina changed its funding formula for transportation projects, was a fairly large leap forward. And in South Carolina, the State House approved $500 million in bonds that go toward infrastructure, just as you were talking about. So that went through fairly well and fairly quickly, but now it seems the deployment of that $500 million in bonds or so is bogged down in politics and debate back and forth. So when you talk about not just the inland port, but when you talk about I-26 and I-85 and widening those, and anyone that's driven on them knows how it is with the trucks and the cars. So reflect on this, characterize in about a minute and a half about how this is going to either help or hurt what you're trying to do in general.
Well, again, there's no doubt that the cargo in and out of our port relies on I-26. We'll always be a heavily truck-based port. So the improvement of I-26, the improvement of I-85 is critical to our port. And I believe that's well recognized in our state legislature today and by the DOT. And that will be prioritized over time, and that'll be a benefit to us. But we've also got to find additional creative ways to move cargo. One is by short-haul rail to Greer. Another is by short-haul rail to Charlotte. You're building a brand new intermodal facility, Norfolk Southern, at the Charlotte Douglas Airport. That also has the potential to enhance the movement of containerized freight. So we've got to improve the infrastructure and prioritize that in a way that makes sense for not only the port, but for the logistics in our state.
How in about 30 seconds, this is probably not fair, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Can you give us a sense of time on when 26 might be widened, or 85?
I can't answer that. I mean, I think that's
so.
Secretary St. Onge's bailiwick to say that. But you don't go a day without someone talking about it.
Yeah.
And part of solving a problem is recognizing a problem to begin with. And I think it's well recognized today.
And let me say this, I didn't say it in the open, but congratulations on year-over-year revenue growth, at least for the last 3 years. Not bad for just starting on the job 3 years ago. Congratulations. We're glad you've got the job, Jim, and thanks for being
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good to see you. Adolphus, good to see you. Thanks for being on the program again.
Enjoy being here.
Yeah, always. And Rand, nice to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's not snowing this time, so you can get back to Raleigh without too much trouble, as last time. Until next week, I'm Chris William. If you have any comments or suggestions, please go to carolinabusinessreview.org. Make your comments, watch our program. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.